I have the absolute fortunate wonder of probably being on the graveyard shift and bringing home a 2-day event that has featured some really fabulous speakers. And a lot of them have said a lot of what I personally would like to say, some far more eloquently than I. So wish me some luck now as I try and bring all of this home. I think in the Western world that we've all been sold a story. It's a story of growth. It's a story of change. And it's a story that kind of starts to infer that if we could just do more, we're all going to get more. And as a result, we're all going to be a whole lot better for it. So what we've seen over time is movement. We've seen people come away from country towns. I myself am one of these statistics. So we've watched this brain drain as good people leave. They move to better opportunity. They move because they know they might be able to create a better place, space, and world. Now, to leave your very family and your social fabric and all of those people that were around you does have implications over time. So for those that take the economic migration path, there is a bit of a social cost that starts to kick in and starts to actually play. And I don't think we think about that social side enough. We should think about it first, foremost, and every time. Not just some of the times, and certainly not as an afterthought, as it's the very last thing that we start to think. So I'm going to use 3 very different places to perhaps just make a few points before I start to talk about what I think are the last few things, based on these 2 days of conversations, that we could now start to bring into our own practice, that we could start to do. So as you know, my home now, my chosen space and place, is Brisbane. I've been here now for 17 years. But I actually grew up in a really small country town, in a place and space where everybody knew everybody and everyone knew everyone's business. So I've kind of got this beautiful perspective that maybe for many is quite rare, because I did come from a really small town. It was actually an orange farm. And I actually credit that today for my capacity to understand and talk to people from all walks of life, because I can talk to people at the elite power circles, but I can also connect with anyone, anywhere, anytime. So I love Brisbane. I moved here pretty much away from Adelaide. Again, opportunity, better job, bit of money, all of that fun stuff. And so here we are today, in a city that's vibrant and growing very fast. In fact, over those 16 years, I have watched approximately 50,000 people move into this city year on year. Now, when you start to do the math for that, this place is going places. You look outside, you see a lot of beautiful cranes as they build and create more and more and more for all of us. Now, supposedly, we're all meant to be really happy, because that's kind of like the whole association and the big story that we're all sold. Yet we have rates of divorce that are actually out of this world. We have rates of depression, mental health, and all sorts of problems that maybe suggest to us that all of this that we're all sold isn't the case at all. So for all of us...
Brisbane real estate record broken. The median house price peaking at $673,000.
What that really tells us is that Brisbane is continuing to perform in a very steady and consistent way.
The latest market monitor report by the Real Estate Institute of Queensland revealing Brisbane's median house price has increased 2.5% in the past year and 30% over 5 years. The top growth suburbs across the city south, Holland Park West, Manly West and Carindale. In the city's north, it's Mitchelton, Stafford Heights and McDowell.
Those suburbs are really popular with families in particular, and what they demonstrate is that there is good affordability.
David Conboy is currently selling this 5-bedroom, 2-bathroom home at Mitchelton, asking $675,000. He's not surprised the suburb is booming.
In this area, we have a fantastic access to infrastructure with local schools, shops and public transport as well.
Listen to all of that. Fantastic infrastructure. It's got all of these wonderful things actually happening for us. We are sold a dream. As a child, I was sold the great Australian dream. You'll grow up, you'll get a house on a 1/4 acre lot. Actually today, in 2018, probably more likely to be an apartment with 1 or 2 bedrooms. So that Australian dream is shrinking. None of us really stop and think and look backwards, go through time, and actually think about this wonderful dream that we're actually sold. Now, I'm one of the fortunate ones because I think I sit in a side that maybe is a bit lucky. There are other people around who aren't quite like me. So what we've all done together is we have created systems, and however we represent them, in whichever way we do, and Linda would have us say that this one's at least 5 different systems going on, not just one. We have created these systems as a group, all of us. We all have a role to play here. So we have to think this one through, because every single thing that we do causes another reaction. So if you think from a biology perspective, every action has a reaction. If you're a management trained person like me, every cause has an effect, every problem definitely has a solution. So I think it doesn't matter which way you are trained, how you were trained to think, I'm going to challenge you that you now need to undo some of that thinking. And for me, the biggest thing I have enjoyed in coming to learn a bit of systems science is it is a whole lot more complex. But as a marketer, I always knew we don't all think the same. You heard so loud and clear this morning from David that the language even that we're using doesn't work for other people. So why on earth do we stand here using complex language? Do we do it because it makes us look really smart? Do we do it because we had to form part of our own little tribe? Hop into one of those silos that Alan had pictured this morning? Because now I can put that tribe around me. We all have a common language and we all share that language. But what we forget when we hop inside one of those glass bubbles is that no one else outside of that bubble has a flipping clue what we're actually talking about. And so unless you're trained to actually see it through someone else's eyes, and you've been trained to read and watch their expression, or you've been trained to ask what it is that they take out, you're putting stuff out there and you're on transmit, not receive. So we have to think, and we really have to think hard, because the work of one of my PhD students probably was most illuminating for me. Even the pictures that we use, the language that is portrayed, can continue to create the divide. If you enforce or reinforce the stereotype, you're making the problem worse, not better. And do we check enough with what we're doing? And we saw great examples yesterday with the domestic violence, that some ads actually make the perpetrators feel worse. You're not helping them. You're not helping them to actually change. So we have to think through and know for sure what we're actually doing, because otherwise we run the risk of furthering the divide. So I don't stand here before you knowing for sure what it feels like to actually be homeless. It's not something I've experienced. It's not something I know. So how on earth can I start to intervene in that space without really knowing? And I don't think it's on any of us ever to be sitting in circles talking about the thing we're trying to change without having the people there themselves. Because maybe they didn't want to be changed in the first place. And that's where I'm finding it increasingly hard to actually describe the work that I do. Because I cannot just say I do behaviour change. The very people that I meet in community, any word I start to use, they start to think I could be trying to change them. That's not cool. I wouldn't like to be told I need to change. I never liked being told what to do in the first place. Now, when they market these beautiful destinations and these beautiful cities to us, is this what we all see? The congestion that we experience every day, because again, remember, 50,000 people are piling in because they're all chasing a dream. more money. And those of us training business students know so many of those people come in thinking it's all about making a fortune. So we've got to be really careful about what we're actually doing here, because we've been sold that dream. And that dream has our children less active today than they've ever been at any other moment in history. Standing there with devices that are rewiring their brains in ways that we don't even understand what impact that's going to have for them as they go forward. So as we all chase this dream and we all start doing less, and we're all driving our cars, not doing much at all, yet at the same time telling everyone now that they need to do more physical activity and change the way they eat, because again, it's all in silos. As it was described yesterday, meteorites are getting flung at all of us. None of this is getting thought through in a truly large way. So when Ross spoke about a nexus, electricity, health, and we need to bring it together, he's dead on. We are still working far too much in a very siloed way. So for all of us, moving forward, we have to start challenging the entire space. How can we bring the resources we have together? If we're talking about traffic congestion, could we now link that with active travel? Can we start to move some of these different things into the one space and ensure two things are now brought together and we're now branding with just one? That's how I'd be doing it. Let's make some of that economics start to work for us. If we start to talk about mental health and other long-term outcome problems, have we actually stopped to look at the root cause? Why is that a problem in the first place? People who are unemployed probably aren't feeling all that fulfilled, and they have all sorts of consequent problems as a result of their lack of economic opportunity. So when you look at these small regional parts of Australia that are dying, I have no other words for it. I drive through them today and I understand they are dying. Are we really getting at the heart of some of the bigger problems that we actually have? Because as we all consolidate into cities and start chasing all of these dreams and living in smaller and smaller places and spaces, have we really hit it? Or could we have actually created a better place and space by not quite fully buying into that story? So our world's a bit of a mess. And I think it's a little bit on us to start to ask a few more harder questions to actually see if we can turn the tide just a little bit more. So I turn your attention to one of those regional parts of Australia. This is not just a single town. There are many, many, many towns experiencing the same problem. They are dying. A population of 448, homes vacated, townships now giving it away to try and encourage life back into a place and space. And if you can imagine, as those numbers shrink, no matter what town it is in Australia, we critically start to look at, their health services are going, their opportunities for their kids aren't there. This is a big, big problem. Do we really all want to be subscribing to this whole city life? I would beg the question and think maybe no. Maybe we could be reconfiguring some of what we're actually doing. Because I was sold a story, I left, better opportunities. Let's go find them. Let's get them. Let's look at a second case study. And again, this isn't just this town story. There are so many that share the same story. If you want to go shopping in this town, tiny little township in the Gulf of Carpentaria, you will pay more. So we'll just add to the fact that some suburbs don't even get opportunity in terms of health, as Julia pointed out earlier. Guess what? It actually costs you more as well. And not just a bit, a lot. That is a lot of coffees for the same size coffee jar. So to me, inequity. I look at it, I see it time and time and time again. And most of the social problems that we've been charged with looking at, they're actually potentially not social at all. So I kind of point a massive finger today at economics. Economics is a model that's all about growth. And you can kind of only get growth one way. Well, in fact, there's two. So I challenge you for a minute, have a think. Economics, if I want to sell more, I sell it either cheaper, which means I've got to go for cost efficiency. So that's why we see technology change. That technology requires us to do something more with less. Now I'm getting some growth, and on it goes. So economics has created this world where we start to consolidate, and that's what we watch with our populations. What it also does is it's forced us to do a lot more with a lot less. That means we've got young people unemployed right across the planet today at the highest rates in history. We've got people working in some countries on the lowest wages you've ever seen, whilst others are earning billions. And the statistics yesterday I thought were frightening. 8 people earning, whilst many, many, many aren't. And that, for all of us, is a problem. Now that's without even turning our attention to the environment. There is no doubt, and we saw again this morning with some beautiful imagery from Scott, it's a bit of a mess. So it's a complex area here because it's all interconnected. And every time I see someone talk on one topic, it's very much, oh, there's a problem in this space. And we come forward and we rarely look at the complexity and the real nexus that maybe sometimes we're going to have to actually really start looking at. Because this is not by any means an easy solution. But it involves people. And that's us. Can we start to rechange and move and come forward with what we're actually doing? So I love the fact that we can look at some problems like littering, cigarettes on the ground, and how we can use the things that Timo was suggesting this morning, some fun gaming tools. You want people to actually not drop their butts on the ground, then give them a reason not to. Now, I know it's not cricket, Samir. So for me, I was marketing trained, and marketing in its most simplistic one-to-one form, which Alan reminds us has been going on for thousands of years, is just simple. Win-win. So some of my colleagues from America might call it what's in it for me, so that as you think, you're starting to engage from the other side's point of view. What's in it for them? So it's a fairly simple notion, and it's incredibly difficult to do in practice because you have to start to think like the other side. Now, most of us aren't homeless. I'm not depressed, even if some people think I might be, or grumpy. So we have to really start our best with the best that we can, or we've got to bring them in and empower them to actually do it, because it's not what I think. So my practice is one of, how can I remove myself from this situation, rather than how can I be here long term to try and get more and more. It's like, can I actually do this and do it with less? Because the way I see it, we have to really start to rethink what we're doing. So remember, I said everyone has a story. How would you feel if I call you disadvantaged or vulnerable? A victim? I think for all of us, these terms, and I read them in papers day after day, frankly, they're stigmatising. They're not okay. No one wants to be felt or called or to be made to feel bad. So why is it that in our practice we've been allowing all of this to happen for a really long time? So next time you start to read some of those words, I'm going to ask you to challenge them. And in fact, if you're going to tell someone they're low SES, I really think you need to rethink that one too. So the way we're using our language, the very things that we all do, and we have been doing it here too, we have to try and rebalance, because it's time. It's time for us to turn the microscope on our own practice. It is time that we thought about what it is that we actually do. So we've been recently doing some work now for a couple of years in the space of sugarcane. One of my PhD students here, Karina, is heavily involved in some of this work, and so are a few other staff in the centre. Now, I put some word clouds up, and these are vision statements from the organisations working in this space. So a policymaker looks at things one way, and uses their words. If you're an activist, you've got a whole different view of the world. How much did those words align? And then what about the very people at the heart of the problem, the ones that are targeted for change? What's the language that they use? When David spoke this morning, he did speak really openly about making sure things are going forward for his son. Did he use words like reef, Queensland, bigger picture? No. So why do we persevere in trying to communicate to people in the language and the terms and the things that they don't use? The answer is simple. It's because we're operating in silos. So we have to come out of these silos because we now need to learn to speak to the people that we want to move. We're not going to move them unless we actually start to connect with them. Remember, win-win. We have to bring it back. We have to do more. So I challenge you, can you start to change your own practice? Can you actually put report cards on yourself? I've never seen a government department have a report card on their own work. I see them happily scoring everything else and pointing fingers all over the place. I do not see them tracking and monitoring and measuring, are they improving? Yet my professional practice in industry did point fingers at ourselves. Our job was to figure out why people still weren't buying the very thing that we were trying to sell and market to them. So I do think we can start to actually be way more positive, and we can start to change and rethink what we're actually doing. So can we actually look at the materials and the communication? And this is just one simple example. It's the simple measure of gobbledygook. So an index that you can use online. It's free, easy to do. Can you now deliver materials that people can actually read? It's a pretty simple thing when you think about it. There's a lot of money and a lot of effort invested into delivering programs and materials, and most of the people out there, they can't even read it. That black line is the level we should be doing. Now that's without even picking on that material to say, is it actually fun, engaging, interesting, in the language they would like, and typically positive. It's a nice little touch to actually bring if you can. Because if we start to turn the index onto ourselves and we can start to track how we're performing, we can start to actually get incremental change. So that's just one example of starting the process of turning the microscope in a very vastly different way. Because it's much more authentic to engage with a community that needs to change when you're really serious about change yourself too. They actually like not being the targeted group. They actually like to engage with people in a much, much different way. So if we're a little bit more reasonable and if we're all sharing the responsibility here, we're going to do a much better job of engaging a lot more people rather than pointing fingers and trying to actually point blame. So some of the methodologies that we can use are what we need to do going forward. No more surveying of a certain group and just pointing it at them. More needs to be done to start to understand how every player in that space or that system thinks, because without that shared understanding, we can't bring people with us. So here I have very simple comments looking at two sides of a water quality story. If I were to speak to some people who are trying to actually support and create change, I get very interesting comments that do not necessarily reflect everything that I go on to see when I go out into the space. They refuse to change. They failed to change. And as you flip and you start to look at the other side, and here we're all reacting to just one question, why aren't we getting sustained reductions? We start to see a very different story. A story that says, because I didn't have access to that information, I've never seen it. I don't understand it. No one's spoken to me about it. And still, consistent with what we heard this morning at our first speaker, maybe I don't believe it. So more needs to be done to see it through other people's eyes, because without that, we're really kidding ourselves and the barriers are quite huge. So there's a lot to be gained from starting to turn the microscope towards all of us to understand what our biases are and to understand the frame at the point that we start. And it will change. We're social, it constantly shifts. So don't just cast the dice once. As Joy pointed out, any form of evaluation would need to be dynamic. It needs to shift. Every action we take does cause some other form of reaction. So for all of us, a really big thing to do. So here's my points to you. I only have 4. My practice when I first started this whole thing of social marketing was that it was problem-driven. Not, as Amantha said to us yesterday, solution focus. Are we selling a 4-inch drill, or are we looking at new ways of creating 4-inch holes? What I've also seen, you need to change. This person or this group isn't doing something. I have witnessed, and I continue to witness, a lot of top-down decision-making rather than community-led or initiated change. So it needs to come from the very people that we want to move. We cannot move them with our own objective and what we do. So one of the failings of a lot of training that we've had is we are experts. And you've heard again today that language, what we do, is holding us back. We aren't connecting. We cannot be experts in someone else's world. I am not an expert in homelessness unless I actually truly have known homelessness for a very, very long time. On top of that, I cannot think that homeless today is what it was when I was homeless 20 years ago. It's changed. It is still different today. So we really have to embrace that. Even when we're passionate advocates ourselves, we have to acknowledge the world's moved on. So what I think we need to actually start to understand is that we cannot just drive change from one angle. This is multifaceted. It takes partnerships, but importantly, it takes breaking out of the very silos that we've been in to actually start to bring about change. So, can we get out of these silos and can we start to build and form new partnerships? I hope in these last 2 days, as you've had time outside, that you've made at least one, if not many, different partnerships that you may now be able to form. Because it's going to take us busting out of what we currently do to actually achieve that. If you do, we will create win-win. And we marketers were taught you just need to beat the standard growth curve and you've taken competition or market share or something from someone else. So you've got to kind of have a little bit of that aggressive mindset to see if you can come forward.